Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Longmire. I am the Director of Regional Enhancement for the Knoxville Chamber. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today. I hope you all enjoyed this morning's sessions. I know I particularly enjoyed hearing from some of our local leaders about how they institute best practices into their workforce development and talent retention and attraction efforts. And then I think Paul Allen really helped a lot of us think about how to better utilize our employees and coworkers based on their strengths. So again, thank you for being here today. One of the areas that I focus on at the Chamber is talent retention and attraction. And as most, if not all of you know, our region, along with the country, is struggling with a constrained labor force. I think we all know that. But I want to take this opportunity to give you just a few data points. So did you know that from February 2020 to February 2022, our labor force actually grew by almost 7,000 people? And did you also know that our unemployment rate is over half a percentage point lower than it was in February 2020? And did you know that the number of individuals claiming unemployment is over 1,000 people less than it was in February 2020? And one more data point. We had over 3,000 more unique job postings in February 2022 than we did in February 2020. Okay, so why am I telling you all this? Really, I want us to have the conversation that our workforce problems are not due to a lack of motivation and what I tend to hear, people sitting on the couch and not wanting to work. Our demand is simply outpacing our supply. So now we need to talk about how we fix that. We keep the amazing talent that we have here in Knoxville. We have some great UT students and probably some other students here as well. We need to talk about how we keep them here. As a community, we need to figure out why we are losing our graduates and what we can do to make them stay here and see Knoxville as a viable option for long-term employment. And then we attract top talent from around the country to live and work in Knoxville. Growth is good. So with that, I'm excited for you all to hear from our afternoon keynote speaker, Torin Monet. Torin is a principal director in Accenture Strategy, Talent and Organizations Human Potential Practice. He's also part of the Accenture Innovation and Thought Leadership Group. He exists to serve individuals and organizations who wish to sustain unprecedented collective human potential for innovation, productivity, satisfaction, and sustainability of the species. He focuses on talent strategy, leadership, culture, career frameworks, performance measurement, learning and development, employee experience and engagement, and applied behavioral science and neuroscience. He has 18 years of experience championing and leading transformation, talent strategy, and organizational effectiveness initiatives across industries. He's received commendations, not condemnations, right? Commendations for leadership, project management, innovation, and customer satisfaction. Torin holds a BA in psychology from the University of California, Santa Cruz, has completed the Organizational Consulting and Change Leadership Program at Georgetown University, and holds an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Please welcome Torin Monet.
Thanks. Hi there. Whoa. Let me give some context also for the material that I'm going to share. So, when I was asked to come and speak, I thought, what could I do to be useful? And at first I thought about kind of narrowly speaking to specific issues that are going on in the market and the talent market. And then I thought about understanding all the regional issues that are going on in the talent market. And then I thought, let's try and share as much as possible in this little period of time that we possibly can that'll make everybody dangerous on this topic so you can be competitive in the way you think about it so that you can vacuum up talent from other regions, maybe have them work remote. But needless to say, it's the competition for finite, highly skilled talent is not a regional thing. It's a national thing, and it's a global thing. So if you're going to compete on that scale, you're going to have to understand some of the context and dynamics that are taking place, at least on a national scale, if not a global scale, because they'll impact you. And competition is no longer regional, it's global as well. So that's the context that I'm coming in here. I'm coming in with a goal to give as much as I can in terms of information. And if I go through some stuff too fast in this discussion, don't worry, all of it's available in a PDF that I'm providing afterwards, so you don't have to feverishly take notes or take pictures or anything. The other thing to consider is that we're all talent. We're all people who work or will work for someone, or will have people working for us. So when we're solving for these challenges, we're solving for the fundamental challenges of humanity, which are, going and working with other people and solving problems and getting things done. And that's an experience that's pretty relatable to everybody. So as we go through this material, maybe think about the world that we're building, because the workplace that we make creates an environment of incentives that shape people in terms of their beliefs and their values and their behaviors. Let me get into it. So I want to get some audience participation for this part, and this is a question really for people who are leaders of business or in a hiring position or in HR or in some capacity to think about how they're shaping the workplace. And if anybody wants to speak up, I'm just going to throw question one out there. What's important for you when you're attracting, engaging, and retaining top talent right now? What are some of the major issues? And you can just shout it out if you want. Wages? Yes, definitely. Definitely. What's that? Yeah, people seem to be caring about their sanity and the other things outside of work these days. It's novel, but probably good for our country to come around on that. Anything else? Flexibility. Flexibility is huge. Probably one of the most important things if you're going to attract top talent. People want to, and they know they have the negotiating power now, right? I'm rare talent. I'm highly skilled. Let me tell you how you're going to provide a work experience for me. Anyone else? Let me throw another question at you. Who are you trying to attract, and what's been working or challenging? Any specific type of talent you've been trying to attract? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. How do you assess the caliber of the people you're getting? What are your standards? What standards can you even have if the person has to, it's manufacturing, so they physically have to be there? Any other challenges or things that have been working when you're trying to attract top talent?
Cultural fit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. We hire for the skills to do the job and the fit with the culture. Sometimes we overlook culture fit, and we've got a person who has the right skills to do the job, but maybe not the right skills to interact with the people. Let me go to the last one. What are you afraid of regarding attracting, engaging, and retaining top talent? Any fears you have?
You hire someone and you put resources into training them, and then they leave shortly thereafter and take that with them.
Yeah.
Employee burnout.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of hard to unwind a hire these days. There are a lot of legal protections in place. You've got somebody around and you've hired them, and now you have to unhire them, and that's a painful process for you and them. Any other challenges? Okay, now I want to hear a different perspective. This is questions for talent. So I want you to put your talent hat on and just think, I'm potentially somebody working somewhere. What are your career goals, and what skills will you need to develop to be a master of your craft? So we're not just talking about talent, we're talking about people who want to be good at what they do. Anybody have any ambitions in the room? Let me take it down a notch, a little personal. What type of culture and people manager do you want? Oops, it got more personal. So these are the kind of questions that people don't always want to talk about in a public space, in a large room of people. This is why we do large data collection. This is why we have global surveys, because we have a hierarchy, we have a power structure in humanity, and in that power structure is management and managed, and sometimes what people want, they're not getting, and sometimes they're not comfortable saying it, and sometimes it's because of the power structure. So let me jump into the talent challenges, and this is where the large data sets become real. So at a very high level, the reason this slide has a ton of text on it, I'm breaking every consulting rule out there. The reason it has a ton of text on it is because I want you to have access to the slides afterwards and to remember what was said and not have to scribble notes. So here are some of the major global challenges that are happening with talent right now. We have to innovate at pace, and whether you do a highly innovative business or otherwise, the pressure that's on people to think and move quickly and change their business is higher than it's ever been before. And when you do that to humans, when you burden them intellectually for a long period of time, it actually makes it so we can't feel as well. So we drop our empathy levels. We start doing a bit of binary coding for how we have an emotional interaction. That person's useful or not, as opposed to, I wonder what deep, interesting, complex emotional experience that person is having. Let me attend to it. So the capacity and the interest and the room in the system for doing that has dropped. Generational differences. We've got 4 different generations in the workforce now. And for anybody who's older or anybody who's younger, you may have had a conversation with somebody of a very different age than you, who grew up in a different time and has different views on how the workplace should run and what the priorities should be. And that creates quite a bit of friction. Unbalanced incentives. If you've been around in the workplace for a while, you've been run on financial-only incentives. And that means that we've prioritized making revenue over the environment, the impact to people, the UN sustainability goals, everything. So when you do that over a long period of time, again, it reduces empathy. I have to make business decisions that are going to hurt people. If I'm going to hurt people with my business decisions, I don't want to feel. So I'm going to reduce that. I'm going to become very bad at empathy. Social isolation. I don't have to explain this to everybody. Everybody's had some mental health issues or knows somebody who has. Workday structure. We've been running people also back-to-back in work only. And when you do that and you don't have social, because a lot of the workforce is remote periodically, you get a kind of decreased psychological safety, low engagement, high burnout, high turnover environment. And everybody has seen this. So there's some of the bottom things I don't have to explain because you've been living them. So let's see if the data backs some of these generalizations up. So Gallup ran a global review of the experience of humanity, and they're one of the few organizations that actually has the time, energy, and connections to do this. And things aren't so great. 80% of people are not engaged, or they're actively disengaged. That means they don't like their employer, and they're trying to mess things up a little bit by talking trash. And that's like, we've been there. We've all been there. Cost of low engagement, 10% of global GDP. That's pretty significant. So if you're a business person and you think about just your business, let's say I could squeeze a little more out. That's a huge figure. And one of the reactions that I love to this data, and I put this in, is people will say, well, we've had a pandemic, and the unhappiness or the system of negative emotion that's built up in people's because they've been in mentally unhealthy situations. And as it turns out, actually, we've had negative emotions rising over the past decade. This is well before the pandemic. So the way we've been running humanity makes people sad and frustrated. And as we scale, humanity's very good at building really big things. And when you build big things, you have to create a power structure. And when you create power structures, this is kind of the Achilles heel of humanity, we become less empathetic. Actually this is some social science, putting a person in a position of power over another person starts to reduce empathy, starts to make the person in power become more self-referential, the decision quality goes down. You may have seen this in Russia. Dark humor. Just trying to keep the audience awake. So what's going to happen, likely, if we don't address this, is mental health gets worse. And if you run a workplace and you have the potential to impact human beings and the way they live their lives, this is pretty important because mental health isn't great right now. So let's look at the generational differences for a second. This is 2018 data. So again, we're not coloring this with any pandemic stuff. We're giving you the real deal human trends. If you look, say you look right here, boomers, some of the values that you see across generation are slightly different. So boomers just wanting the workplace to be ethical. Can leaders maybe do the things that they say are on their list of values and behaviors? Can we not lie to our employees? Gen X, kind of the same thing, not the highest standards. Number 2, though, employee well-being is priority. Then you move to the second, probably 50% of the workforce over here. Number 1 priority for Gen Z and older millennials, the employer cares about employees' well-being. So if you're running a work environment and you're thinking, well, how could we, and we talk about work-life balance, and we talk about kind of the experience that people are expecting in the workplace, how can we create that? You don't have a choice, you have to, because the people won't work for you if you don't. And it's something that I think kind of snuck up on a lot of us who've been in the workforce for a while. We started to have younger people say things like, I want to make sure, this is one of my very favorite archetypical examples, one of my colleagues, I'd like to make sure that my project staffing schedule aligns with my ski schedule. And in the world that I grew up in, I probably would not have been able to talk to that person again after I made that comment. And the world that I'm growing up in now with younger employees is I'm entertaining that. I'm thinking, well, how could we do that? And is that even something that we should laugh about? Wouldn't it be neat if you could have your job and your life mix really well? And from a data and organization of ideas standpoint, that's not that complicated. Tell me what you want, I'll tell you what the projects are, let's try and marry them to something that could be fun for you. So just maybe prioritize employee well-being way, way more than you ever have in your entire career. That's going to be really helpful. Again, really ugly slide, but really important data on it. So we wanted to validate, and this is some internal research that I did with some of our data scientists. We wanted to validate whether or not the competition for people who seek mastery in their craft is actually differentiating. And that's really important if you're going to spend your whole career telling people that it is. So if you have a company made of people who seek mastery in their craft, people who are seeking to be best at what they do, those people are going to outperform individually. They're going to be better at their job. They're going to do a better job of whatever role you've put them in. Your company is made up of those people. If a company is made up of people who outperform, collectively, it often outperforms. So we looked at this. We looked at Glassdoor data. Is everybody here familiar with Glassdoor? Yes, good. And we looked specifically at career opportunities, culture and values, and senior management. And we did multivariable regression analysis. We looked at the Fortune 500, and we looked at earnings per share, because that's a really good measure of profitability, or at least return on equity. And we found that a 1% increase in Glassdoor ratings for career opportunities, so these are outstanding areas to hone your expertise in the workplace, saw a 7.6% increase in EPS. So what we're saying there is, or what we're inferring with a strong p-value in the data, is that you're vacuuming up talent that's trying to do a great job and you're going to make more money. Keep it simple. So let's talk about that kind of talent. Differentiated talent very often, if you're trying to win in a global marketplace, you've got scientists, data scientists, academic researchers, developers, and engineers. They're the wizards, if you want to get a medieval analogy. But they're people who are going to create a differentiating capability for your organization that's going to make it probably able to compete at a national, if not global level. And they care about the things that we've been talking about. They care about having access to great technologies, a culture that matters, flexible schedules, career opportunities and learning, and a sense of purpose. To the extent that you can connect the work that you're having people do to some higher purpose, to some meaningful place in society, you're going to be able to get the best talent, because often that talent is highly educated. It likes to talk about these things with its friends. You see this whole psychographic of people who are really good at their craft and also want to have some impact and want to be very good at it, and there's an intersection in that. And I'm just saying, make sure that whatever narrative you have about your organization, that it's pro-social. Now let's get into some more data. This is Glassdoor data, the same categories we talked about before: career opportunities, culture, management, overall. And this is important to understand really specifically because it shows how competitive you have to be in terms of the talent experience based on what industry you have. And if let's say you're in, I don't know, let's say you're in consumer products, not very competitive. You can run a pretty miserable workplace, and apparently that's good enough. I'm not advising this. I'm just telling you what the data says. So that gives some perspective. And if you're looking at hiring and you're trying to find talent that's scarce, and I'm going to say something that it shouldn't come off as bold, but I need to say it because it's important. Don't limit yourself by region. You need to look at the whole continent. And for my company, we'll look at the whole planet because we don't have any other options than this planet yet. And that gives us the ability to get incredibly talented people, let them live however they want, take advantage of the labor arbitrage and cost of living and however they want to run their lives. And I find that people who are working remote sometimes are desperate to make sure that you know they're valuable because they have all these other freedoms that come with being able to work anywhere they want. I have one of my teammates who went to Columbia and worked there for a while. He was trying extra hard to make sure that we knew that he was useful because he's enjoying living in Columbia for a while. So just consider, and also a very happy employee that's able to live wherever they want is going to show up with an incredibly positive amount of energy. I have some clients that live in places in, let's say, areas of New Jersey that are awful that nobody would really want to live in, and just living there is burdensome. I took a job actually in, no offense to New Jersey, but I took a job in New Jersey, and I had to leave the job. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't live here. No offense to anyone who lives in New Jersey. That was authentic, that wasn't meant to be mean. So here's some more data. This is cut the data by region, and there's some opportunities for increasing the experience of employees by region as well. I won't sit on this slide too long because it's not too popular with the audience. Here's talent metrics by industry, South region. And these aren't specific to, right next door, but if you're looking even regionally, this gives you some idea. So let's frame talent strategy. What kind of levers are we actually pulling if we're going to make our organization run well? And this model is kind of a high level, and this has been around forever. This is the Harvard Services Profit Chain, and it's kind of a reminder of the importance of the stuff that we're talking about. In the front, we've got internal service, quality of the employee. This is where you're making everybody that works for you happy. You're doing everything you can to care for them, to make them feel like they matter. Or maybe they actually do. Maybe you're hiring managers that care about people. And ideally, they end up satisfied with their experience. They stay around. They're productive. They're innovative. And because they're happy and they're creative, they're making your customers happy. And then because your customers are happy, they're not searching around for somebody else, so they're loyal. And one of the biggest expenses to any business is getting customers. And if you have customers that are loyal, you don't have to spend as much time and energy getting them. So your revenue goes up because your cost of sales go down. Your operating expenses for getting and retaining customers go down. So all I do to, or the reason I bring this up is to say, if you focus a ton of energy right here, and measure these things downstream, you may not be focusing on what really matters. The only thing that's going to give you a sustainable competitive advantage is keeping your people really engaged and really happy and bringing around the best people. So these are the levers that you pull to do that. Defining, locating, selecting, this is really critical, getting a really good idea of what top talent is for you. That can be a very, very nuanced discussion, and that's the discussion of looking at organizational capabilities that make you competitive in the market and decomposing those to individual competencies in human beings. And then you have to step back, and we do this terribly, to be frank, but you have to bundle those competencies into something that goes into a real person, meaning the psychographic that you would have for a human being that would do something very well isn't just a list, it has to make sense. I'll give you an example. Let's say you want to have a leader that's a servant leader, really deeply engaged and caring for people each and every day and taking a super low ego position and trying to support individuals. Let's say you were to bundle that with a salesperson, super predatory, get everything done to the extent that it's within the confines of the law. I've been a salesperson, I'm not talking trash. And what happens is it's very hard to keep those two together. I mean, you're almost going to create a bit of psychological torment, and you have internal incentives that might pull at each other. We do this in consulting all the time. We put salespeople in leadership positions. So think hard about the type of people you're looking for and whether that's a real person when you put together roles. And the rest of these things should seem very familiar. Developing, engaging, measuring, succession, this is pretty standard talent management. But attending to it and making sure that it's comprehensively connected as opposed to in different silos in the thinking is really important, or else you end up with incentive structures that are pulling at people or roles for people that are pulling them apart. And we do this, and sometimes this is what I love. Sometimes we solve for it by increasing pay. So we're like, okay, we made a role, it sucks. It's miserable. It's so hard to execute. Let's just keep increasing the pay until somebody will take it. And eventually have somebody take it, and then they, have a miserable time and get paid well. Here are the levers that we found matter the most, so you don't have to get distracted by the noise. If you're going to focus on things, make sure you nail leadership culture, make sure your career frameworks really make sense and create mastery for the people that they exist for. Make sure you check in with the institutions that are in charge of greatness. If it's an engineering role, make sure you check in with all the different institutions that think about greatness in engineering, and that you tie those together. So people are going out to their communities of practice and other places where they rub shoulders with people who have a great deal of skill in their area. They come back and they go, wow, my job really knows how to make me great at my profession. Performance management, we mess up so many things in this space. This is riddled with short-term thinking. Incentives are very hard to get right. I sometimes step back and I'm like, maybe just give everybody stock. I can't get it right otherwise. Because you create internal organizational competition, and it's the intra-organization competition that kills us. Because as a species, we're really good at competing. We're really good at figuring out how to share information or not. We're really good at figuring out who to connect with, or maybe if this person could potentially make it so I'm not as successful, maybe not. And now I've got an organization of 8th grade politics if I don't get my incentives right. And that's pretty common. Leader actions. This is where we're going to get right into what you should do as a leader of an organization or somebody who advises the leaders of an organization. And I'm going to go through it. There's a lot of stuff in here. We may not even get through all of it, but I want to get to discussion. So I'm going to go through some stuff maybe faster than I normally would, because some of the slides have whole decks that they would normally go with. But I wanted to make sure that the concepts are there so that you have them, and if you want more information on them, a lot of the stuff is publicly available. And some of the stuff that we have, you have in a deck as well, so you can download it. So what leaders need to do to attract and retain top talent? Number one, you have two systems in your brain. The first one, the dopaminergic reward system, is something that we're familiar with, not in name, but in function. Making goals, achieving goals, facing your fears. This keeps the human brain healthy. And keeping human brains healthy is how you make them sustainable, and also how you make them high-performing. So if you're a business person, you're already killing at this. Every day you have goals, short-term goals, long-term goals, daily goals, and you get them done. And that system works really well. The other system is a little more nuanced. It's serotonergic reward system. So that means you're going to have to be emotional at work, for lack of candy coating it. And that means you have to practice empathy, vulnerability, generosity, and nurturing relationships. That's literally how you make the system sustainable and work well. If you don't do those things, it doesn't work well. And then you can't self-soothe. It handles quite a few things. It handles learning, neuroplasticity. It handles managing stress. So we saw a lot of really interesting stuff in the pandemic when people didn't attend to this because they just did work and they stopped socializing. They stopped asking questions like, how are you doing? And then looking in somebody's eyes and listening to what the person said, and then feeling the feelings that the other person felt while they were feeling them. If you don't do that, it breaks your brain. And it makes it so you can't self-soothe. If you can't self-soothe, your anxiety level goes up. If you're depressed or inclined towards anxiety and depression, that goes up. If you're inclined towards depression in a really severe way, we move you kind of towards suicidal. And during the pandemic, we saw people who were feeling bad get depressed. We saw people who were depressed, maybe get suicidal. We saw people who were suicidal, maybe take their own lives. So this is a non-trivial topic. I received something I've never received in my career recently. We're talking about employee satisfaction. It was suicide prevention training. And I thought, wow, we didn't used to have that in the workplace. So the issues are real. Next one, understanding incentives and sustained competitive advantage. A lot of us have been raised on only financial measures, and what we really want is to move to incentivizing leaders to create great human experience outcomes. So everybody measures human experience, and usually what we do is we talk about it afterwards and try and solution it a little bit. Imagine if you actually paid leaders to make people feel good. And you, as a leader, couldn't actually get paid as much if you didn't do that. Eventually, being a leader would only be appealing to people who could make people feel engaged and good about the work that they do. It seems like a fairly simple concept to me. I've been railing at the system for about, 2 or 3 years on this one. People are moving slowly. I think it took endemic levels of sadness in the global workforce to motivate, and a lack of talent, and the Great Resignation. Like, it took all of that, and unprecedented mental health and leaves of absence. And I think I've gotten some leaders' attentions now. So if you do that, you're gonna have workplaces that will be appealing to people in a way that's really sincere. And ideally, it'll be appealing to people who seek mastery in their craft. And that will provide sustained competitive advantage. Driving productive interpersonal dynamics and community. This one's real simple, but busy leaders don't always take time to do it. 2 steps, simply stated: coach people individually and develop them, have them find purpose, have them find a great deal of meaning in the world, and then take what you learn about them and use it to weave together strong interpersonal relationships and community. This makes human beings way more resilient for all things. It also creates a kind of hive consciousness for problem solving. If you don't connect people emotionally and intellectually, they don't collaboratively problem solve as well. Last 2 things: driving peak collaborative ideation, flow state, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, and then using innovation governance. So if you're trying to solve problems, you need to manage the idea of each problem as though it were a project in a portfolio. And these are conceptually pretty standard business concepts, but they become more important if you're trying to move at pace. So this is maybe a bit of agile management over here, but you need to have some process that makes it so you identify what's not working and fix it fast. I talked about this already. I'm not going to talk about it anymore, but this is a chart if you need to talk about it. So here's some data on what it would mean if you created an environment for people that was emotionally more satisfying. And I get asked a lot to improve productivity in the workplace, and I get asked to do what I would argue sometimes are not very value-generating things. People will say, well, can you improve this process? Can you tweak our culture a little bit? Can you make sure that the roles that we have are competitive in the workplace? And if you want to improve productivity, sometimes just being nice to your people and making them not sad and scared is the easiest. And the analogy, the joke that I'm cracking lately that I can't stop making is, when I go buy chicken, I buy chicken that has a label on it that says that it's been treated fairly. Imagine if we had workplaces that were certified, psychologically safe, and people were treated with dignity, and the work was created without any harm, or less harm. Maybe we minimize the amount of harm to the humans. That seems pretty reasonable. I'm not even shooting for the stars here. This is a very low standard. But the way that I get business leaders' attention very often, who've been shut down emotionally for 20 years, is to say, all these things will get better. We have a bunch of research on this that's not even ours. This is external research by real academics. Some of the, Amy Edmondson, some of the leading academics in the world. And if you make a safe workplace, you get more innovation, you get more satisfied people, you get less burnout, you get fewer sick days, you get people more likely to collaborate, everything that you would want in the workplace. So how do you do this? It's really not that complicated. You have to be nice to people and empathize. You have to democratize power. You have to be genuinely curious. This one's tough. Resisting antisocial inclinations. Business is a magnet for psychopaths. Subclinical, not actually people that get diagnosed. So business is very appealing to people who don't necessarily feel a lot, because there's a lot of money and a lot of power, and it vacuums them up and it sends them to the top, because that's the appealing place. And sometimes in society you step back and go, why are the psychopaths running the world? And it's very simple. They would want to run it more than everyone else. It would be natural that they would end up running it. So resist antisocial inclinations. If you're in a position of power, try and be nice to people, even if it hurts. Seek feedback, actively listen, humble yourself every now and then, and be pro-social. There are 2 other things that support this workplace that are really important for everybody to understand. This one, being authentic. If you're coaching people on your teams, having them figure out what their values and purpose and meaning is, it's important that you know that for yourself. It's important that you tell them that whatever it is for them, bring it into work, be honest about it. Bring yours into work, be honest about it. That makes people feel safe, because the human mind wants predictability. And if I know who you are and what you're about and what drives you and what you're trying to get done in the world, and you act that way, I will trust you. If you constantly change that, I know you might be a little bit on the sociopathy scale. and it would be natural that I would be uncomfortable around you. So do this with people. It's very helpful. The other thing that supports high psychological safety in the workplace, super simple, be inclusive and drive a sense of belonging. So take time to get to know people. Include people, share people in power structures, draw people out in meetings, listen empathetically. This seems like the sine qua non for humanity. I think we learn this naturally. I think we kind of pop out and do this naturally, and then we spend our whole lives unlearning it, and then we have to relearn it as adults. Driving engagement in the Gallup Q12. This is a list of the things that we consider engagement if we were to talk to the Gallup people. One of the key things that's in there, and I don't know how many people run the Gallup Q12. It's pretty common in large corporations. Okay. I'm getting some head nods. This is good. The Gallup Q12, we run it personally. We do great on some things, horrible on other things. I'm not going to get into it because I get all fussy. The key thing that I want everybody to look at is number 5. Number 5 is really important right now because of the stuff that we just looked at regarding Gen Z and Gen X and all the context. 5 might, in my humble opinion, might be the most important thing right now. If you're running an organization and you've got a very poor score on caring about people, why would you expect them to stay around? This is what I made reference to very briefly that I want to get into in just only a little bit more detail. This is running your teams in flow state. So it's transient hypofrontality, which just means an altered state of consciousness. And everybody's been here. I'll demystify it. It's that time when you lose track of time in a working session with other people and things fall to the side, but you are doing exactly what you need to do, and it's going very well. And then afterwards, you go, wow, we got a bunch of stuff done, and it went really smoothly, and I don't know why, and I lost track of the day. So flow is a state of increase in some real specific neurotransmitters. So we got an increase in endorphins, dopamine, and anandamide. The reason you care about this is if you're trying to problem solve with other human beings, endorphins are gonna reduce appetite and enhance confidence and immune function. They're gonna help you stay in the game. Dopamine's gonna improve focus. And if you think about what the crucible of problem solving or innovation is in humanity, it's the ability to take different patterns that you recognize and bring them together in novel ways to solve a problem. As a function of how many ideas you can hold constant, you can come up with more complex and novel solutions. So this kind of, is what has separated us from the animals for quite some time, and to some extent, it's what separates the progress of different companies. Anandamide elevates mood, improves respiration, expands the size of the database searched by our brain's pattern recognition system while improving our ability to link disconnected ideas. That's going to be really important if you're trying to outperform your competition. So if you can get people into this state and then work in maybe in a working session over a couple hours to problem solve. This is why we drink coffee, actually, a simple example. It raises dopamine. So if you can jack your dopamine up, I'm not saying drink coffee all the time because obviously you'll burn out your dopamine, you'll have Parkinson's or something, but make sure that you get people's brain chemistry to this state. You can do it very naturally. Here's a natural approach. Based on all the research, these are the triggers to get your teams into the state. So if you want to solve a problem, run a meeting, have a working session, these are the things that are going to get you there. Shared goals, psych safety, familiarity, complete concentration in the present moment, close listening, additive statements where you're not shooting each other's ideas down. Sometimes the ideas that come out that are great are a function of a bunch of little pieces of other people's ideas. You may hear somebody in a discussion, they bring up an idea, and you're like, God, that idea isn't a very good idea. Don't trash it just yet. Sit with it for a second and go, okay, I could see a little piece of that that's useful. And then somebody else says something that ricochets off that idea. Now all of a sudden you've got an idea off somebody else's what seemed like not a very good idea that's turning into a good idea over here. That's literally how we solve problems as a species. Autonomy and sense of control. This one's really big and I don't think people talk about enough. If you make a human being feel like they don't have sense of control, you remove their autonomy. Let's say you put them in a call center. You say you have this script. These are your 5 buttons you can press based on the social interaction. Over time, it actually makes their mental function go down. So you may, on a call center, sometimes have some customer support and go, why is this person not thinking? And they're running that person in an environment that makes it so the fundamental pieces of what makes them a human, that incredible creativity, problem solving, all the things we love about ourselves, doesn't work. So think hard about the way we build workplaces. Think hard about how much oppressive power, how much autonomy you take away from people, how much you let them feel a sense of control, because you can do some real damage to people. You run somebody in an environment like that year over year, now all of a sudden you've got a zombie. That person's going to have a hard time in life. Blended egos. This one's nuanced. When you're running a team, make sure that the experience of the people on the team is not as individualistic and is more collaborative. We celebrate the team's success. And it's very important for the way the human mind orients and puts in energy. Equal participation, I don't need to talk about that. Open communication, you know how to create that if you've worked in any sort of trusting business environment. And then this is the final slide before discussion and Q&A. And I really wanted to bore the hell out of you. I want to end on something that's just a real yawn fest. This is an innovation architecture you can use. These are the key things. You can do a lot more Agile in your workplace. It's really differentiating. It's not that hard. You can bring in Agile coaches or some kind of people that will talk about Agile. If you're not familiar with what Agile is, it's a little bit of culture, a little bit of psych safety, a little bit of team problem-solving stuff, a little bit of keeping track of what the fixes are that you could do to continually make things run better. So this is kind of like a table stakes, make sure you do it. Flow state, we talked a little bit about that. You can Google it. The triggers are out there. It's super easy. You can download the deck. You can use it. There's people who talk about this flow state stuff for probably about a decade. A lot of good stuff out there. Then design thinking. Design thinking is empathy-based exercise to get your head into the heads of the people whose problems you're solving with your business. Those are all really easy to do, high-value things to drive innovation. Then have some sort of structure for catching problems and then turning them into projects and making sure that you stay on them to solve them. So that's the most boring slide I can end on. Does anyone have any questions? Please.
So my question is around, you mentioned incentivizing leaders to create optimal work experiences.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about that, Torin, and what have you seen that's worked well?
Oh, God, I love that you asked this question. I could have paid you to ask this question. So I have a client. That made, this might blow some people's minds. I have a client that took their vice presidents of their corporation and made their performance measures 50% employee experience. So this is a client that runs Glint. You can run all sorts of different employee experience. I think Glint is owned by LinkedIn. And they have a bunch of predefined measures. They're statistically valid. They look at them across industries. They give you some gauge. And they measure things like, they literally measure happiness. They measure free to speak my mind, which is a psych safety measure. They measure perceived innovation. Do you think the organization is doing things that are innovative? They measure passion. So they measure a lot of things that sound very soft for the employee experience, but they're very fundamental. This is a company that's a global leader, one of the biggest, most successful companies in the world. And if you are a senior leader in that business, over time, you're required to keep your people happy. And one thing that I experienced personally, I was running a team that worked adjacent to them and had to work with this other vice president's team. And what we noticed is that the people who worked in this organization were very scared. So we'd ask them questions, they'd have to run the decision up the ladder all the time, they'd have to check with people, they didn't have autonomy to make decisions, and they also acted a little bit crazy and paranoid. So we started to understand that there was an unhealthy environment that they were being worked in, and that leader disappeared. So that's a real example of how you could run those incentive structures. And they brought in somebody who was less abusive, frankly, to their workforce. Any other questions? Any things that you've seen that I could elaborate on or try and make more useful? Yeah.
So this is a little bit of a curveball, but
Please. My
on the
favorite.
slide with the brain waves, I've been looking into binaural beats, and I was reading a white paper about how you can get into different flow states based on using binaural beats. Are you familiar?
I'm
my first
familiar,
question.
and I actually, one of my old bosses was really into binaural beats. I don't have background in that specifically, and I haven't used it. Most of the things that I've looked at for getting people into flow state are I have an EEG that I own, so I've looked at brainwave patterns. Of course, right? What do you spend your money on? And I've looked at brain chemistry, and I've looked at nootropics, and I've looked at all the things that you can do to try and make the neurotransmitter precursors more readily available. So if you're trying to make the stew in people's brains that makes it so they can problem solve better, some of that's just biology, and some of what's here is just a chemistry set. So if you're doing your research and picking up your neuroscience textbooks for fun, there are fundamental ways to make sure the systems that produce and move around these neurotransmitters are working really well. You can look at myelination fundamentally, if you're kind of taking a first principles perspective and you distill human beings into a bunch of cells, you're trying to make really high functioning brain cells. And there's biology to that. So if you Google around and look at how can I make my brain cells work really well, how can I make my neurotransmitter synapses work really well, you'll start to find that you can speed things up, you can create more dependability, and some of it's just physics. It's a wet computer, so it's got electrons running down something, and that's insulated by something else.
What would you say is the number one thing that you found for that?
Sleep.
Sleep?
Yeah.
Hey, not that hard.
Sleep and exercise. Exercise is going to make your prefrontal cortex work a little bit better. So if you're sleeping really well and you're trying to exercise, you don't have to exercise that much to have a statistically valid impact. That's better than all the other gadgets and hacks that are out there. But if you're doing all those things, you want to go a little bit further, Please.
Yeah, I had a question. My name is Brady Parker. I appreciate you sharing today. I wanted to ask, you were talking about how intra-organization competition hurts us. Can you speak about how to navigate from that state of intra-organization competition to the shared ego that you mentioned, and how to kind of make that transition?
These are my favorite questions. These are things I've dedicated my life to. So intra-organization competition, and competition in general amongst human beings, is probably responsible for a lot of the trauma that exists in humanity globally, to put it lightly. So if let's say you're just trying to solve at home. We're not going to save the world just yet, but we're going to do it one step at a time. So we're going to take our organization, we're going to try and remove the level of inside competition that makes people withhold information and do arguably antisocial things, or maybe even if they have an inclination towards antisocial tendencies in their personality, move them more into that over the course of their entire career and harden it. So look at your incentives. A lot of the incentives that we have inside of companies don't necessarily encourage us to share and collaborate. And sometimes they'll bring in consultants, fools like me, and they'll say, we've got these incentives that make people want to kill each other. Can you improve collaboration? To which I say, no, I can't. It's impossible. Or can you do training and development? Or maybe it's people don't know how to do things. I had a terse conversation with somebody who was sending out information about the multicultural perspectives of our employees globally. And her point of view was that we weren't treating people well because we didn't understand the different cultures that we work with. And I said, look, we've got 700,000 people that are excellent at keeping our multicultural clients very happy. We don't keep our people happy because we don't care. So think about the incentives that you have and whether they make empathy when practiced becomes stronger. When you ignore it, it atrophies. Think about whether they're increasing empathy or decreasing empathy over time. That is your best litmus test for this discussion. And it's really simple. Just say, this is the incentive, this is the way we designed your job. Does it make you want to care about people more or care about people less? And watch that. And you can even interview people on this, like, hey, you've got this part of your job. Which part of your job makes you need to care about people less? What parts of your job make you need to stop feeling? What are the scariest parts of your job where you need to put on your hazmat suit and your body armor so that you can carry out that part of the job? Where you have to go like subclinical sociopath. Like that's a big part of it. Looking at incentives. The culture that you make needs to be connected to a sense of external purpose that's pro-social and engenders a level of positive feelings and a reason to go do something that's really meaningful. And if you spend time thoughtfully weaving that together and then explaining how people's roles connect to that, you can get what becomes a lot more of a shared esprit de corps, that blended ego. And then as you progress on that, celebrating it in unison in a way that's meaningful. I'm part of my company that's also part of, my title got any longer to be stupid. It's already kind of stupid. It's called Fable Plus, and it's focused on psychological safety, for example. They're doing a workshop in Germany right now, and I just checked in this morning, and they're looking at their values personally, and then they're looking at their team's values and reason for being in the world, and then they're trying to connect that to the mission of the organization. So if you're a leader, talking about that whole narrative and making people understand how the thing that they do each day connects to the thing that's more meaningful or that everybody's trying to get done is very important. But I'd say those two things. You really need to address the incentives and the emotional experience that it makes people have in a way that makes them act, and you need to have narrative that connects people. Does that help? Okay. Any other questions? Please. Or I don't know who's had their hand up, so I want to be respectful.
Hey, thank
Yeah.
you for speaking about this, first of all. It's really like encouraging to hear someone speak about this. So as young talent,
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have advice on like how we can tell if a company is genuine and like caring about these things. And then also like how can we enact change, from the bottom? Just anything on that topic.
So there are probably two things. One is making clear to employers thing, and the other one is an actually go do thing. So make clear to employers that you read Fishbowl, Glassdoor, and that you network through LinkedIn to do informational interviews through alumni or friends of friends or whatever at companies. So when you talk to employers, scare them a little. Say, hey, I've got some friends that work at your company. I read this thing on Fishbowl. I read this thing on Glassdoor. They need to understand that there's a whole generation of people who don't look at Fortune. I think it's always funny when it's like best employer rankings in Fortune. It's like, that's great if I want to hire people who are over, 40 or 50. But there's a whole other portion of the workforce, that was for one member of the audience, that knows the joke. We just got ranked. And I was like, oh, top 10, really? Okay, that's great. Now let's talk about the reality. So make it clear to employers that you're an informed person, that you know their stats, that you know how they rack and stack relative to their competitors in terms of their metrics in these different data sources that your generation has access to, that everybody has access to, but your generation actually uses and contributes to. And then make yourself informed in a way that's very real, and hold the line. If an employer if you go dig through their ratings and they have nasty stuff and they're running a shop that's pretty unhealthy, don't work there. In fact, don't give them any talent, don't give them any time. Tell other people, probably don't work there. It looks like a pretty toxic place. I think it's extra important if you want to make any sort of progress in the workplace to hold standards. And if I'm an employer, I'm an employer, right? If I can't get talent by changing the way that I act and conduct myself and treat people, we're dealing with, at Accenture, this is very real. We have generations of people in the workforce who are like, why can't I just make the analyst do whatever I want, whenever I want, like a robot, without any regard for their humanity? Like, well, if you keep doing that, we won't be able to get analysts anymore, because have you read the Fishbowl ratings? Like, everybody's behavior is out there in public now, and you have access to that information. Please.
Hi, I had a question about how perception of leadership has changed over time. In my limited knowledge of this field, I used to think of examples of leadership would be like elite military units or professional sport teams that inherently get rid of low performers and others rise to the top. And it seems like this is a whole different model of bringing the whole team in, and just, what are your thoughts on that? Are those models legit?
I like a sensitive question right at the end. So here's the deal, and I think about this a lot, and it's very near and dear to me. So if you want to be successful in running a global enterprise, and you want that to be consistent over time, you really have to do what any elite organization does. You have to compete for the best talent. And competing for the best talent and working with the best talent doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't really, really nice to people. They aren't in conflict. I have a senior mentor that is extremely kind. I have worked myself nearly to death in different situations to make sure we're successful under her leadership. And the reason I can do that is because I have so much emotional capacity to handle a lot more because I'm not in a place that's hard on me. So I guess what I'd say is competing for the best talent that you can have and treating people with kindness and generosity can exist in unison. And it's nuanced. But think of your closest friends. Think of the people that you depend on. If you can build that kind of relationship depth, you have a level of commitment and you have a level of energy to give that's unparalleled.
Okay, that's all the time we have today. If you could please give Torin a round of applause for his time.